coffee, big cup, and hello. Welcome back to another episode of the Gilmore Way Podcast. In just a few days, it will be All Hallows Eve, the one day where the veil between the living and the dead is the thinnest, and the spirits of the dead can return to the earth. At least according to Hocus Pocus. It's not just a holiday invented by the candy companies, Max. We also happen to be at the episode where Richard loses his beloved mother, Lorelei the First, so we thought it might be a good time, if there can really be such a thing, to talk about death and grieving on Gilmore Girls. But first, I gotta get all this mask. How does the Life and Death Brigade do this?
I really don't know. Like, this is some serious effort on their part.
It's quite a thing. But I will keep the hat because
it was an ordeal. That's fair.
Because Halloween.
I will counter.
There you go. All right. So Halloween's coming. Just
it is
a few days away from Halloween. Do you have any plans?
Well, unfortunately, Halloween, it looks like it's falling on a Tuesday this year, so I will have to go to work, but I'm hoping for, some really epic costumes from my coworkers, from people in the office. I think it'll be really interesting to see what people come up with. I actually, even though we're still a week out, I'm actually probably going to make some Halloween cupcakes tomorrow night just to bring into the office this week because, sugar gets us all by. So that's going to be something I'm doing. I think it'll be a really sweet treat. No pun intended. I'll have to experiment to see if I'm going to dress up for anything for work because I feel like my costuming department is kind of lacking these days. So I don't really know what I have at my disposal, but, who knows, maybe after work, might go out with the coworkers, might see if there's anything in town that's going on, if there's a, late night Halloween festivity activity within the city. We'll have to see. Still sussing it out. You got anything going on?
Not really. I'll probably just watch a cozy spooky movie. There's a few childhood faves of some people that I straight up haven't seen yet, and it's kind of embarrassing. I've never seen Halloween Town, so that might be a thing. Or maybe I'll just watch Buffy with Dan and continue on with that train and have a vampire-y Halloween. But
I mean, I totally get the Buffy train, but I'm sitting over here being like, how have you never seen Halloween Town? This hurts my fall spirit soul.
I know. It's because I keep rewatching Hocus Pocus over and over again. If your eyes are on the screen right now, you will see my, oh, look, another glorious morning. Makes me sick mug. That is the size of my head. I actually bought this when we got these hats. We were costume shopping for the costume competition at FanFest. And there was a suggestion in the email for attire for the weekend that gorilla masks and your favorite hat were suggested attire for, I think it was the book walk, which we didn't actually make it to because it was one of those first activity in the morning things that we were we can skip that, right? We can get sleep instead. So we never actually got to wear them at the event. And so we're like, you know what? Halloween, perfect time. So yeah, I've decided, I think I want a Disney bound kind of as Winifred from Hocus Pocus for Halloween, but I'll just go to work and probably go to my usual restaurant at the end of the day and just have a couple drinks and come home and hang out with Dan. But for my birthday, I found this green velvet blazer on an amazing deal. And so I just snatched it up. Doesn't matter if I have somewhere to wear it. I bought it. And so if I just wear that with a purple top and some fitting jewelry and do the sort of the lipstick look that she does and, a dramatic eye look and just do the the face, yep. It'll work. So, just sort of a work appropriate, but who I am kind of look this year.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. A part of me wants to go shopping, and then a part of me is you're going to wear this for a couple hours at work. So, we'll have to see. I am always the kind of person where I'm more excited to see the creativity and what other people come up with. because I feel like so many people could do it so much better than I can. And this is something that we saw a lot at FanFest, where I was just personally floored with the cosplay and how people dressed up as these characters. So I'm excited to actually go to work and just see what other people come up with. I might do something similar as you. I might go out like with some coworkers after, and then just end it with maybe like a Halloween movie. But I need to go back and say, like, please, please, please watch Halloween Town. It is like a blast from the past to my childhood. I know it's exactly up your alley. It's just, it encapsulates everything about this time of year. And I just selfishly want you to watch it. So please put that on the list before the end of October.
Yeah. I'm not much of a scary movie person, like a horror movie buff. You are. And like we actually just watched The Witch together. And I was just like, witches aren't my, like in the words of Rory, they're not my angst. I don't know. It was a fine movie. I didn't have any problems with it. It was just like, I didn't find it that scary. And I did that with The Ring one year on Halloween too. I watched that and I was like, why is everybody being like, this is the scariest movie ever? I don't know. It just doesn't speak to my particular like fears, I guess. So I like to stick to the sort of like fun Halloween movies. I don't
know. Halloween Town.
Yeah.
That's all I'm going to say.
It's on the list.
I mean, like, it's fine. It might like minutely frighten you if you're a 4-year-old. If you're not, you're probably good to go. And it's Debbie Reynolds, like, but like, it's just, I will probably go back and watch it if not for that, if nothing else. But yeah, that one's a good time. It puts you right in the spirit.
Right. Well, we actually have a topic this week, not to, bury the lead. We have more to say. We have an actual discussion to have this week. So, Laura, what are we talking about this week?
This week's going to be a little bit heavier, you guys. So we did want to preface it with just, acknowledging that there are some topics that are addressed in the show that we need to talk about that are worth mentioning. This week is going to be one of them. We're going to be addressing grief and loss on the whole, and, how we all need to combat it in general as a society, but how we see grief and loss play out on the show. There are a couple of deaths that we unfortunately have to contend with as we're watching from season to season. So we're going to be addressing how our characters deal with that, some of their coping mechanisms, whether they're good or bad. But just in general, like, this is something that it's a topic that's not dealt with on the show very often. But when the show does address it, it's really impactful and it's really always in service of the story. Whether it's handled with the appropriate amount of gravitas or not is another question, but it's something we're going to be diving into this week. However, before we get into too much of the heavy, we do just also want to remind you that this is a Spoilers All podcast. And there is a major plot point concerning this week's topic in general from the revival that is definitely going to be spoiled. So if you want to avoid that, now's your chance. But if you could also do those YouTube things for us, please like this video, share this video with your friends and family who love Gigi as much as we do. Subscribe to our channel. Leave us a comment if you have thoughts. It feeds the algorithm, YouTube gods, and it really does help us out. And we're always so grateful for that.
Yep. All right. So our first synopsis this week is episode 16 of season 4, The Reigning Lorelai. Gran dies of a heart attack in her sleep, unexpectedly, and Emily goes into logistics mode carrying out her wishes for the funeral. But the discovery of a horrid letter from Trix to Richard on the eve of their wedding sends Emily into a tailspin. Lorelai steps in to take care of the details, and Rory rewrites her obituary.
Okay, this is followed up by Girls in Bikinis, Boys Doing the Twist. And frustrated by the never-ending New England winter, Rory and Paris decide to do something out of character, and they join Janet and Glenn in Florida for spring break. They run into Madeline and Louise, who teach them the ways of party maximization. And a cute boy grabs Rory's attention until it's clear that he's just not really interested. But it's okay, because she does end up getting a kiss from Paris. After just a few days, they decide they've had enough of the debauchery, and they fly home early. Meanwhile, Jason makes a big gesture in his relationship with Lorelai in offering her a key to his apartment, And Luke gets arrested for kicking the car of the guy that Nicole is cheating with.
Yep. Smooth move, Luke. We'll talk about that eventually too. But for now, given the time of year, it's spooky season. Tuesday is All Hallows Eve, which, it's the eve before All Saints Day, which is a Christian feast. It's a liturgical feast or liturgical time of year, time on the liturgical calendar. I like saying the word liturgical. Don't hear it enough. But it's dedicated to remembering the dead, saints, the dearly departed, martyrs, all of those kinds of people. And the tradition holds, I guess, that it's kind of the time when the division between the living and the dead is thinnest, and that's how spirits can come back and roam the earth. And so thought it would be an interesting time, and we happen to be up to the episode where Trix dies, to talk about how death is portrayed on the show. Like we alluded to in the opening, it doesn't happen all that often. The first time it's actually mentioned is in the cold open of Cinnamon's Wake, where Emily is saying Claudia died. And then Lorelai's like, I don't remember this woman. I'm not going to her funeral. And Cinnamon, rip, passes on. And then Emily loses her mind a little bit when she finds out that Lorelai went to a wake for a cat instead of going to her own cousin's funeral. What's next? A raccoon's wedding? So, yeah. And then the first time we have a human funeral, it's actually Luke's uncle, Louis Danes, in Dead Uncles and Vegetables. And so, it's a kind of quick mention of a person dying early in the first season, and then we have a cat die. And then we have Dead Uncles and Vegetables, and then we have like a full season before there's anything else, which is when Fran goes. And then once we hit season 4, you start seeing sort of like an uptick in the amount of serious stuff they start covering, and it's like more and more mentions of it, or like there's more funerals in seasons like 4 and 5 than the rest of the series combined, which is a little wild. But where should we start? Should we start with Trix, since we're talking about the episode where she passes away suddenly?
Yeah, I think that's a good starting point as any. Obviously there are quite a few deaths on the show that I think, merit a mention and that we should discuss. But considering this is where we're at chronologically, and considering how vast of an impact it has on a lot of the Gilmore household, I definitely think this is a good one to jump into. Not that any deaths are, good places to start, but you get what I mean. Trix's death was very much, it weighed on a lot of our characters. And I think it allowed them even to acknowledge in a way how much they really cared about one another, whether they wanted to admit that or not, and how it affected their bonds moving forward as other deaths within the family cropped up. So yes, I think we should start here.
Yeah, actually the episode starts off with yet another mention from Emily of someone passing away, but this time it's her friend Sweetie, and Lorelai is of course irreverent as always, and is like, where'd Sweetie come from? And she's like, it's a nickname, like she was sweet. What kind of story about my dearly departed friend would amuse you? Because of course Lorelai can't do anything serious. She's like, it's not for my amusement, mother, but like, yeah, it was. Like, why did you ask that question if you didn't want an amusing answer? But then the more important part of that scene is actually Richard being like, ooh, what time on Sunday is the funeral? Because Jason's arranged golf with one of our clients. Like, how important is it that I go to this funeral? And she says it's not important at all. So what did you think of that?
I didn't like it at all, because Richard instantly, the second that Emily was just like, you don't have to go, like, it's not important, Richard was very quick to take the opt-out and just be like, okay, then I won't. And I understand that within partnerships, within relationships, within marriages, two people are going to have a different level of familiarity and closeness with other people in their lives. But it sounded, and it was I think it was made very clear to us as an audience that this is someone that was important to Emily, or at least the idea of attending this funeral and having the both of them being actively present together was very important to Emily. And she was putting that out there pretty concisely, if Richard had just picked up on it, that she wanted him to be there. So when he was just like, do I need to be? And she was just, if I was Emily, like, I would have just been like, yeah, you need to be there, but I think she was just I don't want to deal with this. I don't want to have to combat this in this moment. So she's like, no, you don't have to. And gave Richard essentially the out that he was just seeking and wanting to take. But I didn't love it because it was obviously, again, very important to Emily that Richard be present with her. She wanted him there. And I have to like flag Richard on the play for not perceiving it all like that this is important to your wife in this moment. That, like, I understand you've orchestrated a golf outing with Jason and some potential clients, business people, whomever, but you need to be here for your wife in this moment. She's obviously very much in need and wanting your support in whatever way that you can provide it. So I hated that Richard was just like, yeah, it's not important. I don't need to be there. I can just go golfing, right? And Emily's like, yeah, fine, go golfing. I mean, both were wrong for not acknowledging and communicating their needs, but Richard needed to step up and be there. And Emily needed to make it very clear, you need to cancel that outing and show up to this. Non-negotiable.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's a business thing, guys in their golf and business. Like, it sounds like an important client was in town. And I don't know what it's like. Is it hard to get a tea time? I don't know. But it sounds like maybe it was hard to reschedule this because the guy was in from overseas or whatever. So I kind of get that. But at the same time, they were already in a tenuous place in their relationship from the Pennell and Lot issue. And just from, Richard, like his whole change when he started his own business, and then Jason joined, and just all of the changes that Emily was contending with, and how much Richard was getting on her nerves. I don't think she wanted to rock the boat by forcing him. And it's unfortunate because, Emily at this point is only 60-ish. And so the fact that one of her friends passed away was kind of unexpected. And so, well, I think she said she had been sick for some time, but still, like, you don't expect it to happen to someone that young necessarily these days. And Richard shrugging off her grief and just being like, oh, well, my business is more important, is still such a knife to the heart, because we see shortly after this that Gran dies. And obviously I think a mother dying is often a little more impactful in someone's life than a friend, depending on how close you are to that friend. But Richard losing his beloved mother shook him to his core, and he was allowed the space and time to grieve in his own way. And so maybe Emily was just playing it too cool and not showing how much it was getting to her. And he took that as, well, this is just sort of a routine social engagement to show up at a funeral like this. And so I can probably get out of it because I have a business client in town. But we see Emily stepping up to the plate to plan Gran's funeral when Richard can't because he's too emotional. And so, he's allowed to have his grief, and Emily is there for him and everything, but he can't be there for her. I didn't love that.
Yeah, it's very hypocritical. I mean, there's no better way to put it, especially when we see Emily going to those lengths to sit down with all of the letters and the documentation and estate documents and, the sorting out of, what's left over in terms of physical possessions, monetary possessions, who's going to get left what, where everything goes, and how everything gets sorted. Emily is actively taking this on for Richard's behalf when she really doesn't have to necessarily. I mean, I'm sure you could even hire people and outsource people to do this sort of work for you. But she goes and she sits down with Lorelai and she's like, we're going to work through this. You know, I'm going to sort this out for Richard until we come across the letter. And it immediately changes her tone of how she feels about her mother-in-law. And I think that's a moment that's really noteworthy and worth highlighting, because I don't ever feel that Emily was grieving Trix in a way where she's like, I just need to go cry and wallow because I can't process this woman not being in my life anymore or in the world anymore. I don't think she ever had that connection with her, but out of love for Richard and out of a familial obligation, she was recognizing this is a loss that Richard is very heavily contending with at this moment. He's obviously not doing okay. He's holed himself up in his study and is just drinking away the pain. I need to step forward and take care of business here, so to say. And then we get to that letter and she's instantly just like, actually, nope. Somebody else can do this because I'm so stunted and offended in this moment that someone who I may not have even cared for, but who was relation by marriage at this point, could have done something so cruel, and now I'm finding out about it. I no longer owe her or my husband in this regard any obligation to continue on with the work that I'm doing as a result of her death. And she opts out and she pieces out. And I mean, I really can't blame her. That was a very difficult letter, I think, for her to have to contend with, for anyone to have to contend with, knowing like, wow, you really never wanted me around, did you? But what do you think about that moment and how it affected Emily's processing of this loss at this point and the efforts that she was putting forward on behalf of her spouse?
I love that Kelly Bishop calls it her Tennessee Williams moment on the show, and it's like one of her favorite things to have filmed. Honestly, I probably would have gone to that place without even finding that letter. I'd be like, nope, I'm putting on my cozies and I'm reading a book and I'm drinking my weight in single malt scotch. But it's not usually Emily's way. I love how Suki comes in and she's like, I think she broke. That line was so great. But yeah, you're right. I don't see Emily truly grieving. In a way, she's probably actually quite relieved that she'll no longer necessarily have Gran breathing down her neck in person. Although part of her final wishes were to have an open casket funeral and then be cremated, half of her ashes to be buried with her husband and half to be on Richard and Emily's mantle. And so she's like, yeah, my mother-in-law is going to be sitting on my mantle judging me for eternity. Great. And I love how Richard kind of is like, no, she should be with Dad. We're not going to do that. I think that's the right thing to do. And I love that he kind of gives her permission to go against Trix's wishes in this moment, because I do think Trix did that to be vindictive. And so, I mean, I guess that opens up the question of like, when can you, or how can you refuse the final wishes of a family member? It's such an interesting question because it's such a difficult process to go through, right? There's so many logistics and sad things to take care of that at some point you have to ask yourself, why am I doing this? And usually it's because you love someone. And so what happens when you don't? What happens when that person has been awful to you? You know, we have it with Trix and we have it with Louis Danes. Luke was extremely frustrated by that process and by Louis's wishes, as well as his father's, like trying to balance those competing interests while dealing with the fact that Louis was not a very liked person in Stars Hollow or even in his own family. And so it's an interesting question, not one that I particularly have an answer to. I think I'm lucky enough in my own life to not have had to deal with many of those kinds of situations. And it's never a straightforward answer. And so, I mean, I love the moment in the show. I think it's some of the best emotional work and like emotional writing that the show does. I think overall this episode was really good and didn't cross too many lines. I will say my major quibble with it, or primary quibble with it, shall we say, is the phone calls that Emily is making with the fact that like the florist has moved and the reverend is retired and she's trying to track people down. And she says that like she's calling the idiot stepson of the florist to try to find the new location. And she's like, yes, I will speak slowly and clearly. And then she calls Manny Martelli and is like, she gets someone else and is like, can I ask when he'll be back from the science fiction convention? And I'm like, did we have to like take a dig at people and be like so snotty right now? Like there were any other number of ways. Again, relatively minor quibble. In the scheme of things, I've just like, there are some jokes that really land for me in this episode, like the I think she broke, and you know, the fact that she's reading this book about a prostitute in Victorian England. Like, just, you know, there are so many things that add some levity to this really difficult episode. And I just think that her sort of like her need to put down the people who she's talking to in this process reflects badly on her and reflects badly on the writing as well, the fact that they had to go to that place. But anyway, what about Rory? Like, how do you feel about how Rory reacted to the whole situation? Because she didn't know Gran as well as the other Gilmores, and I thought she had an interesting reaction. But what was your take?
She definitely did, and I will say this, like, I don't think it's a wrong one. You know, everyone processes grief differently. There's no right or wrong way to do it. And I feel like that's something that even Rory was acknowledging when she is working through the immediate response that she does or does not have when Lorelai calls her and she's like, hey, I need to, you know, give you some tough news. You know, Gran died. And Rory's response is just, I should be crying. I should feel more sad about this than I do. Why am I not essentially as bent out of shape as I should be? You know, I'm not having a breakdown. I'm not emoting. And it's like, okay. And so you're not. Like, maybe that's how Rory processes grief. And I think it is to an extent, because I feel like she has a very similar reaction when Richard passes away in the revival, and she has to contend with that as well. She's obviously heartbroken over losing her grandfather. She's not an unsympathetic, you know, person, but again, everyone is going to grieve differently, and Rory is not the type of person to just immediately, I'm going to cry my eyes out. I'm going to have a breakdown. It's just going to be a tear fest. I can't deal. I can't process. I think she is definitely recognizing the loss. She's understanding it. She's comprehending it. It's not something that is going over her head. It's very clear cut to her that someone in her family has died. But maybe that's something where she takes in that knowledge. Perhaps she needs to sit with it for a while, let it marinate, let it process within her. And then she will, if she ever even wants to, and if she doesn't, it's okay. But maybe she'll emote on her own time, whether it's a week later, whether it's a month later, however long it takes for someone to process that grief and let it hit you. You're going to feel it and you're going to acknowledge it in your own time. And so I think it's actually healthy that Rory is questioning, is this right? Like, should I be crying? Should I not be crying? She's acknowledging, I think, that she's going to go through her own path with this. And the response that she has may be different from the response that Richard has, who, you know, Richard immediately locks himself in his study, again, breaks down crying, and starts to drink away the pain. You know, again, everyone's going to work through trauma like this and a loss like this in their own way. But Rory's response was not wrong. It was just truthful to her.
Absolutely. It's definitely valid, especially when a death comes as a shock, to take some time to process that and to have that sort of period before the emotion truly hits you. I don't think it's surprising at all. What caught my attention was the fact that she was like, what if I don't cry at the funeral? Like, what will people think about that? Well, like, if they see me not crying, what's that going to say about me? And Grandpa will be upset. So I find it interesting that, you know, the empathy is there for like, I don't want to upset my grandfather by not matching his level of emotion and by, not honoring this member of the family with my emotions, basically. But the fact that she goes to kind of like what other people will think first, as opposed to why am I incapable of processing this emotion right now? Like, there's some self-reflection, but it doesn't quite go deep enough, which I think speaks to the show's complete inability for characters to self-reflect at all. So there's that. But yeah, Richard's reaction is obviously far more visceral. Like I said, he's very, very close to his mother. He absolutely reveres her. He calls her a saint multiple times. I really hope Rory figured out how to work saint into her obituary. I also find it fitting and very nice that she was able to use the Yale Daily News archives to write a fitting obituary for Trix after the one from the Current was just kind of blah, very standard, boring. She did her some justice. She was an interesting woman who lived quite a life, and Richard was insistent upon that. But his reaction is another one we should definitely touch on, because, I mean, obviously he's always going to be upset at the passing of his beloved mother, but it's even more heartbreaking knowing what happened the last time they saw each other in The Incredible Sinking Loreley's, when dinner ended in a fight because Trix was trying to flex about helping Richard out of a financial predicament when they first bought their house, the first couple of years of their marriage. And Richard lost his temper with her. And so he has all of this regret that he has to deal with over the fact that their relationship ended with, raised voices and harsh words. So do you think that Lorelai was right in saying that, like, that one fight, even if it was the last thing you ever said to each other, doesn't wipe out all the years of, devotion and love?
Yeah, I do. And I think that was really compassionate advice for her to be giving her father in that moment. I'm sure that Richard is not the only person in the world that has had a loved one pass, and you look back on it and you say, my last interaction with that person was problematic. It was stemming from angst or anger or frustration, even out of the fact of knowing that this person is going to pass soon. For whatever reason that there might have been negativity within a final interaction between a loved one and someone who was still alive, like, unfortunately, I think that's a very common thing. And so I feel like a lot of people do have to live with that regret of saying, I lost someone in my life that is so deeply important to me, and my last interaction with them was not how I wanted to be. And now I have to live with the regret of them going to the grave, so to say, not having a good resolution on either one of our parts. As the person who is still living, I am going to have to live with this regret over that for the rest of my days while I'm here on earth. And that's heavy. That's not anything to be ignored. That is going to weigh on Richard for the rest of his life. It would weigh on anyone for the rest of their lives. But I think it was good for Lorelai in that moment to just be like, it didn't end perfectly, or your interaction was not how you wanted it to be before you ended up losing your mother. But it doesn't mean that there was love lost within the relationship. It doesn't mean that all of the years of care are erased. Families are going to fight. There's never going to be a perfect relationship, within any sort of one-on-one within a family member. But again, it doesn't mean that all love is lost. So I really have to applaud what Lorelai did there, and just trying to assuage Richard's guilt and just be like, hey, I'm sure Trix passed knowing full well that her son loved her deeply and immensely, and that, is not something that you should or need to bear the weight of now or in any of the days to come or for the rest of your life. And I would hope that anyone would do what Lorelai did, but I have to commend her for it. I think it was just a really well done and loving thing that she did for her father at that time.
I agree. It can be really hard not to have closure because it's so permanent. But I think, yeah, she did a good job to remind him that there was more to their relationship than just that one conflict. And it, it's not like a points column kind of thing. But if it was, your positives far outweigh your negatives, and you'd probably be better off just trying to focus on the good things and remember those instead of this. We don't actually really hear about Trix again or see any more of Richard's grief, so we don't know how he ended up processing it. But sometimes that's just the reality with television and life. You don't always get closure. We learned that from Max Medina. So, yeah. Okay, I have at least one more thing to talk about on the Trix front, and then we should probably move on. Jason Styles. I've seen it argued on like Facebook forums in the fandom that Jason was a jerk for not going to the funeral, for not supporting his business partner and his girlfriend in their grief. I'm not sure I entirely agree. What do you think?
This is a tricky question, but a good one to ask. We don't know if he put forth another effort or display of sympathy outside of actually attending. Maybe he sent flowers. Lord knows there were plenty of them that were being delivered to the Gilmore household in the lead up to the funeral and after Trix's passing. If we don't know what the will was, maybe she requested that money be donated to a certain organization or a trust fund or, something. I don't see Jason as the type of person to just be like, I'm not going to acknowledge this whatsoever and just be like, okay, like you died. Let me know when you're ready to hang out again. I don't see him being that cruel, but this was a woman that he knew essentially nothing about, that he had nothing to do with. Yeah, you're in a business partnership with her son and you're dating the granddaughter, but those relationships don't always necessarily tie over extensively in a way that, leads your mandatory participation in showing up at this funeral. I think he made it very clear that he was compassionate and sorry about the loss that they were dealing with. But he makes it very clear. He says himself, like, I'm not good at funerals. Some people just are not. Some people can't handle that level of trauma when there's that much emotion in a room that's being output by dozens, if not hundreds of individuals. That's a lot to process individually. But again, when you're perceiving it from so many others that you're surrounded by, it can be a hard thing to intake. Not everyone can process that or handle it in the same way. So I think it would have been nice to have seen Jason show up at the funeral, but at the end of the day, it doesn't make him wrong or a bad person for not being there. If he's acknowledging, this is beyond what I can handle in this moment. If there's any other way that I could possibly try and be here for you, I will. Please just let me know. But I'm communicating to you and I'm letting you know that this is not something that I really think I can do at this time. Please understand that. So I think he was good enough to communicate that. So I'm not going to really be one to hold anything against him here. I mean, this is not like missing, a birthday party for a kid. Like, this is something heavier that has a lot of emotions that people need to contend with. It's not going to be something, again, that everyone can process. So if he felt he couldn't do it, I think he was well within his rights to just say, like, I can't, but I'll try and be here for you in another way.
Yeah, of course, it would be nice for him to go to support them, but this is their family thing, and they've got each other for support. It's not like they're entirely alone. And, there are still probably business tasks that need attending to that Richard won't be able to address for some time. So, like, someone kind of has to keep the ball rolling there. And like you said, it's a lot of emotion, and not everyone is good at processing emotion like that. And he acknowledges that in himself. He says to Lorelai, he's like, I say the wrong thing, I do the wrong thing, I make jokes with words like Nantucket, and like I completely relate to that. Like it's a lot to handle. People like Jason and like myself, frankly, I see a lot of myself and Jason in this moment. We're like emotional sponges, where it's like you have to go and you have to like take on, like, you feel everything that's happening in that room, even if it's not how you feel inside. And so, like, when you're absorbing the intensity of everybody else's emotions, that can be extremely uncomfortable and overstimulating. Like, I skipped my own grandfather's funeral for that reason, because I knew that I wouldn't be able to handle everyone else's emotions in that moment. And we've suggested this before, or discussing it in further detail in future as well. But speculating that there's a possibility Jason might have been written as though he was on the autism spectrum. And emotional regulation and processing of intense emotions is something that people with autism can sometimes struggle with. It all depends on the context of the moment, the environment. If it's very intense, like, funeral homes are not fun for anyone, not to mention the only people he'd really know there who would be sort of like a buffer for him for comfort is the Gilmore family, and they'd be busy the whole time. So, like, it's one of those situations where I think anyone who maybe doesn't recognize that sort of like difficulty in emotional processing that he's expressing here, they might think it's a lack of empathy. And there's often a myth that autistic people don't have empathy, that they're self-absorbed, or that they're uncaring. But that's just wrong. It just doesn't get expressed in the same way that neurotypical people express it. And so they can totally, like, have just as much emotion or emotional distress at the distress of others as neurotypicals. And it's just not shown in a way that would be like expected. And so I think that's what he's trying to get at with that, like what he's telling Lorelai, just saying, like, I don't do well with this. Like, I start getting inappropriate. His recognition of his own social deficits in that moment is sort of like an awareness of the fact that he has emotional processing problems. And so, it can be hard to find the right words to say in difficult moments like this. And so I don't blame him for not wanting to take on that burden. It's not his grief to carry. He shouldn't be forced to attend a funeral for someone he met once, no matter how much he cares about the people related to her. He can be supportive in other ways. We don't know that he hasn't been supportive in other ways. And mourning is one of those things that is often very personal, very intimate, and we shouldn't be so judgmental if people want to bow out of the rituals and mourn or process these things in their own way and avoid these highly uncomfortable social situations, especially if they struggle with social deficits in other situations too, which we see Jason copping to. So I think that he was well within his rights to be like, I'm really sorry for you and I'm here for you, but this is not my place. But that brings me to a very interesting thing. He does go to the wake for Richard Gilmore. Yeah. Because he had a personal connection. He wanted to pay his respects in the end. And he probably wanted to check in on Lorelai, even if it means dodging Emily. So he took that excuse. I think wakes in general are less stressful because they're usually held in homes or other spaces that are not funeral homes, that are so like steeped in death. And you can kind of like dip in and out. You just sort of like go. It's a little more social. It's like food and drink flowing. It's a little easier to deal with than like being in a room staring at a coffin, right? And so I think he was able to manage that situation a little bit better. But I think this is the perfect segue into the revival and Richard Gilmore.
Yeah, it's tough. You know, Edward Herrmann was a gem, a wonderful actor. I'm just going to separate, for a second, the actor from the character and just say that I feel like this was a loss that was felt not just within the show for Richard Gilmore, but it was a loss that was very much deeply felt by the actors on this show as well. And I feel like it was very easily able to be translated into the performances that we saw part fourth, because it wasn't like he passed 5-10 years before the revival was filmed. It had been somewhat immediate. And it was something where this was a character that probably would have been back for the revival and made an appearance had he still been alive, but he wasn't. And so I feel like what we were seeing from Lauren, from Alexis, from Kelly was not always just acting. I feel like it was just also a very clear cut and hard realization of Edward's gone. Richard's gone, but Edward's gone. But how do you feel? Like, do you agree that it translated into what we saw from their scenes in the revival with how they processed that grief as actors and how they were dealing with like Richard's death versus, losing Edward in real life? Do you feel like you saw a crossover there, or did you not? And how, I feel like I want to take this one at a time with how each of these women processed Richard's death. But I'll start with that question, and then I'll say, let's start with Emily and how she deals with losing her husband.
Yeah, I think I saw some crossover. I think Kelly Bishop's performance very much came out of missing a dear, dear friend. Apparently, Kelly was one of the only friends outside of the Herrmann family that was invited to the hospital when Ed was taken off life support. So, that speaks to a very deep friendship and very special connection. And I have heard stories of them returning to set to film the revival. It must have been mere months, a year, maybe a little bit over a year, depending. He passed December 2014, and obviously the revival aired 2016. So very short window of time. And I know that Kelly has told stories about going onto set and mentioning him and the lights flickering. It's sort of felt like a sign from him that he was there with them. And she said it was also really hard to film dinner scenes because it was sort of like there was an empty spot for him. And you see that physically when they're having the dinner scene with Kirk and Luke shows up because Kirk's car is broken down.
Mm-hmm.
And Luke won't sit in Richard's spot. It's the only empty chair and he won't sit. Can't sit. And I think you could feel when they talked about it, especially Lauren and Alexis when they were doing the scene in Lorelai's kitchen, talking about, Lorelai's mortality and all that, like to absent friends. It's a weird thing to say about your dad and your grandfather. And so you can tell that's a meta moment where they were pouring one out for Ed a little bit. So I felt it because I knew what had happened in real life. And so, but on to Emily. Emily by far was the absolute star of the revival for me. I think that she saved it, basically. Rory's storyline was just really unfulfilling and uninspiring. Lorelai's was nonsensical at times, where it's just like, how's it been 9 years and you guys haven't talked about marriage or children in the intervening time? This just doesn't make any sense, and it's just kind of weird. But Emily's story, I think, was true to life, and it was interesting, and it was so well written and well acted for the most part. Acted excellent. Written, I have a few gripes, mostly with the therapy stuff and the way Emily talks about her grief group and stuff like that. But it, it's a huge journey for Emily's character to go on, because she's the kind of woman whose life revolved around a man for 50 years. She says, I had a real partner for 50 years and now he's just gone and I don't know what to do with myself. It's a very specific lifestyle to have, and it's hard enough to lose a spouse without losing so much of your own personal and social identity along with it. And so I think it was a very beautiful exploration of the stages of grief. And I love, like, it's hard to do a Gilmore Girls revival without Ed. But when it comes to Emily's storyline, they couldn't have done it much better, if you ask me, in terms of the growth that she had and the process she had to go through with widowhood and loneliness and just all of the things that come along with such a major life change. So, what do you think about Emily and the revival?
I mean, flawless. And not from an acting perspective, although, I mean, again, Kelly Bishop just knocked it out of the park, from here to Sunday. But I feel like it was just one of the most truthful representations of grief that I've seen. It didn't sugarcoat how hard it is and how unbearable it can be, and the coping mechanisms and the diversions that we might try to put forth to try and distract ourselves from pain, to alleviate it, even if momentarily. Just knowing that we're not going to be able to fully ignore it, that this is going to be something that we're going to have to confront. But every one of her actions was so truthful to me as just a part of the grief process. When she's in the backyard and she's, saying, like, please, everybody tell me just like a good story and a positive moment that you can recollect about Richard. It's a part of, like, it's a part of her process, because at that point, it's probably just, I could either just break down right now, or I can try and relive some of the good moments. So I need your help as the people that I'm surrounded by in this moment to try and relive some of those good moments. Please present me with the good recollections and the memories that you have. And so that's one part of it. And it's truthful. It's nice and it's comforting to be able to just remember the good times, so to say, and just be like, this person's gone, but let me try and reflect and think back to all of just the amazing things that they brought into the world and those good times. And I feel like that was why her reaction to Lorelai, pardon my language, but just completely shitting on that moment in the way that she did, and just being like, actually, Dad wasn't so great. And we were playing hide and seek and he left me in a trunk and then went on vacation. And it's like, I can see how Emily would be understandably upset, because she's like, that's not what I asked any one of you to do. That's not what I needed in this moment. I'm trying to work through this right now and process this pain. And all you can do is just, bomb me with this revelations of, like, all the times that your father wasn't perfect. Like, and that leads to the interaction they have in the kitchen with, them just being like, do you not understand the pain that I'm feeling? Do you not understand the pain that I'm feeling? I lost my father. I lost my husband. All of it is truthful. I just feel like it's contention that's not exactly how it's going to play out all the time within any family when they lose a family member, but it's hurt and it's pain that needs to be felt, and it is being expressed in that moment in one way or another, even if it wasn't perfect timing or in a way that mother and daughter saw each other expressing that pain, but they were contending with it in the way that they best could in that moment, and they were voicing that hurt to one another, even if it was affecting one another in that moment. So I'll start there by saying, like, yeah, it sucks. Like, and, I grieve for how that affected Emily, just having your daughter being like, I asked you for just a positive memory and you couldn't even give me that. And so now you're just driving this knife deeper into my heart of just me needing to contend with the fact that I'm going to bed with my husband, not sleeping next to me and not in this world anymore. And all I asked you to do was help me, just give me a memory that could dull some of that pain this evening. And all you did was bring it to the forefront.
Yeah, that scene is so hard to watch. Half the time when I rewatch the revival, I just skip right past all the funeral stuff because I can't with the time waits and the fight in the kitchen. Like, it's good, but it's hard to watch. But yeah, that's definitely a very truthful thing for her to do. I think in general, wakes do tend to have that sort of like nostalgic thing, like, hey, let's remember the good times. And we'll get back to that when we talk about how Lorelai processed Richard's death. But I want to talk about a few of her other mechanisms as well for dealing with stuff, including Berta and inviting this whole other family to kind of move in and be with her. I find it really it's so funny because it would be a silly situation, I think, in any circumstance, but just the fact that she had fired a maid every episode from the beginning until now, basically. And then she keeps one through the entire revival. And not only that, but she like welcomes the whole family into her home and coexists with them and invites them to come to Nantucket with her. It's just such a moment of growth for her of starting to respect what these people can bring to her life and how much she shares with them in such an intimate space as her home, and how she can finally connect to other people. I think, they're trying to get at her social isolation with her sleeping in late and not going to the club, quitting the DAR, dating but not dating Jack Smith, because that's something that can very much happen. And I'm glad that they were talking about like how people can sometimes retract a little bit from the world and just become a bit of a recluse. But okay, speaking of Jack Smith, question. Do you think that she didn't keep on a relationship with him because he was boring, or because it was finally her chance after 50 years with a partner to be her own person and to do her own thing? Like, do you think she was more concerned with finding the right companion for this stage in her life and he just wasn't it? Or do you think that her letting him go was sort of a sign of her moving into like her own era, if you will, like, as the kids are saying these days, her independent era, or whatever you might want to call it. The coastal grandma era, Sans husband, Sans boyfriend, huge vibes. Like, what's your take on the Jack Smith situation?
I think it was a little bit of both, but I wouldn't even call it like a 50-50 split. I would maybe say it was like 80-20, where I don't think Emily was ever going to not let another man into her life if it really, really was the right person, but it had to be the right person. And I think at that moment in time, she was just like, this is the first time where I've been able to perhaps pursue my own interests, do the things in life that are going to fulfill me beyond social obligations and relegations and scheduling for my husband for his business partnerships. You know, where I don't have to attend DAR meetings. I don't have to attend social events that I really just don't want to be at. I can do what's going to make me happy. And so I think if a man were to come into her life again who would be flexible enough to allow her the time to do that and realize, like, she needs to have her own passion projects at this point and her own time to herself. I feel like she would have let that person come into her life. But I feel like, you know, what we saw in the revival was just her being like, this dude ain't it. You know, he's probably even worse than Richard was in terms of the lack of compatibility, and perhaps someone that, like, I just can't get along with right now. It's not that he's necessarily a bad person, but he's going to, I feel like, inhibit my time and my freedom to be able to do the things that I want to do. So I think that's why she essentially is just like, you know, I need to dismiss you from my life because I need to do me right now. And doing me is going to be a part of my healing process, what's going to allow me to work through this. Um, and I just don't think that there's enough compatibility with you at this point in time for you to be a part of that. So I need you to go because it may seem selfish. I don't think it is, but I think Emily just needed to make it about her and what was going to allow her to heal appropriately, and not even as quickly, but just as well as she could in that moment. And this man was not going to be a part of that equation. So I don't think it was boredom. I think it was just her realizing, I have needs that need to be met right now that don't necessarily even come from a man. There are probably a lot of like internal fulfillment needs, but I need to be able to acknowledge those and work towards succeeding at those. And I can't do it if I'm inhibited by this person, as bad as that may sound. I think she was just like, Emily Gilmore needs to do Emily Gilmore right now. And that's what it needs to be.
Yeah, I think after 50 years, she was like, this is my time. And it was a process to get there in terms of, as I alluded to, she started out in a grief group that she was like, oh, it's really annoying that people just talk about themselves. Like, I have grief too. And then Lorelai suggests, you know, one-on-one grief therapy. And Emily's like, I'm not crazy. And Lorelai's like, no, but this is uncharted territory and you need someone to talk to who can help you through this because nobody knows how to deal right now. And it, you know, it's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean you're crazy. Oi, with the, like, it's 2016. Can we get over the whole, like, therapy is only for crazy people stupid trope? So that bit kind of annoyed me. And then she gives up on that and she does the, like, well, actually, she does Marie Kondo first, which is how Lorelai, I think she does Marie Kondo first. And then Lorelai's like, no, go to therapy. I love the Marie Kondo scene, though, where it's just like, she's looking around at all these items that hold memories, some fond, maybe some not so fond. And now she's just looking at it all like, this is no longer my life, and I can't talk anymore. No longer need these things, and it's just a reminder of the fact that my life isn't like that anymore. And so I think that was an important process for her, in terms of clearing out what was never truly hers, things that maybe she held too lightly, and just ridding herself of these unnecessary trappings and doing something for herself, which ultimately ends up with her moving to Nantucket to be a docent at a whaling museum where she can freak kids out with stories of, you know, spearing whales and what they did with all the parts of the whale. She took way too much pleasure in that, but it was really funny to watch. But it was nice to see her find serenity and peace and comfort and security and companionship in this new place without it needing to be attached to a man, because we'd seen enough of that. And now, you know, she comes from a generation where most women just got married and stayed married, and that was how life was. And now she finally has a chance to see what her life could be without all of those trappings of expectation. And so, as tragic as the situation was, I hope she's living her best life in Nantucket.
Yeah, I agree. And I think you make excellent and well-rounded points about how she was dealing with it, how she was processing. She was just doing what she needed to do at the end of the day to get by and to heal from it. And I love what we saw from her because I think it was just a healthy representation of a woman who was, newly widowed and dealing with that and working through that grief. And I commend Kelly Bishop for the representation of it, for how the writing backed it up. And I just, not that I love, us needing to address it, but it's a very real part of life. So as hard as it's going to be sometimes, I love that they put this on screen, that they didn't shy away from it, and that they addressed, again, some of the truthful realities of needing to work through the loss of a loved one.
Yeah. Let's move on to Lorelai. Already talked a little bit about the wake. Again, such a hard scene for me to watch because it's so uncomfortable, and it's almost like a stretch to believe that she couldn't come up with something, because we had seen 7 years worth of storylines between them where they actually had some nice moments, like when she helped him start his business, and when he let her escape out the window to avoid the setup with Chase Bradford, and the going away party for Rory where he complimented the life she had built in Stars Hollow. But I think what was happening there was that the grief and the sadness was bringing up traumas and the neglect of her childhood. You would think it would be easier to come up with good moments, but sometimes grief brings up things that are not so warm and fuzzy, and she was trying to deal with these deeper and more complex feelings that she had to work through. It's not just happy memories, but sometimes also pain and regret. And Emily was trying to, I think you're absolutely right, she was trying to get stories from good people, or get good stories from people to live in those happy moments, to make it feel like the pain wasn't as strong, to try to keep it at bay a little bit. But Lorelai was exhausted and drunk and didn't have the same relationship with Richard. He was somewhat the more neutral parent, but he was still manipulative and sometimes cruel and absent. And so Lorelai had to contend with a lot of more difficult feelings, even probably than Emily, because of her tenuous relationship with her father.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think Lorelai was ever trying to purposefully sandbag Emily in that moment. I just think it, again, stemmed out of, she was probably way too drunk to really process exactly what Emily was asking for. When you're in that inhibited state, obviously the grief processing is going to come out probably even in ways that you don't necessarily foresee or realize, because your emotional gates are also just inhibited and down at that point. You're not going to be able to process them the same way or come to the same moments of realization. So I just think the fact that she was in that state at that time when Emily was asking her, please recollect something, I think Lorelai even knew, like, this is not a good time. I can't do this right now. And that's why I think she was kind of just, saying, like, oh, you move over, you sit next to me, you go next. You go next. Like, because I think she knew, like, I can't address this in that moment. I'm just not there. I'm not able to process this right now, even though that's what my mother wants. But I don't think she had enough, I guess, boldness in that moment to just be able to say, like, listen, I can't give you what you need right now, because it would probably make her look bad to the rest of the people that were sitting around this, backyard patio. Emily may or may not understand. And as hard as it is, I wish maybe Lorelai should have just been like, listen, I'm not in a good enough place right now where I can recollect about my father. You need to, like, just give me a pass and not make me do this at this moment in time, because I'm just not there. maybe if she had said something like that, I don't know if Emily would have understood, or if she would have just been like, you're scapegoating, Lorelai. You're curtailing this. Give me a story. Or if Emily would have recognized, actually, my daughter's probably in pain, which is what she alluded to in the kitchen, where she's like, Mom, you're not the only one in pain here. I just lost my father. I'm not curtailing what you're feeling, but you have to understand the grief and the loss that I am feeling as well. Maybe if that had been communicated a little bit better, and she's like, I just can't tell a story right now because I don't have it in me, maybe Emily would have responded a little bit better and just been like, I get it. Thank you for being honest, Lorelai. We can just move on to the next person. I don't know, but Lorelai was obviously still not in a place where she could communicate that. So she's like, well, what I'm going to put forth is negative baggage. For whatever reason, I think it was also a part of her grief process as well, and a coping mechanism to realize my father wasn't perfect. Maybe I need to recollect some of that first before I can actually get to the good moments that we had. And I need to just, like, air out the dirty laundry before I can really start to acknowledge, actually, my dad was okay some of the time, and we see her get there in the revival. But I feel like maybe this was just a part of the process for her too. And again, is there anything wrong about that? Should we, rag on her for it? I don't necessarily think so. It wasn't great in the moment, and Emily did not appreciate it, but it was also just a truthful representation of the relationship that this daughter had had with her father.
Yeah, again, it's another completely valid reaction to have to grief. It's often not a linear process to work through it. And so, yeah, I think the term airing out dirty laundry is exactly right. And you have to work through both the good and the bad. And at this point, Lorelai was still going through the bad. She didn't necessarily recognize quite yet how deep that connection and that love for her father was, despite all of his shortcomings. And we see it alluded to or foreshadowed in season 1 when he has that bout of angina and ends up in the hospital at Christmas. And Lorelai says it to Luke in the car, where she's just like, my dad was not a bad, did what he was taught by his father, and he went out, he got a job, he supported my mother, and bought me a Barbie doll, and all he wanted was a daughter who could wear white dresses and be an appropriate society woman, and I couldn't do that for him. So she feels like she has to deal with her own shortcomings and his shortcomings, and the fact that their relationship was tense, and not to mention, she says it to Rory that she found a brochure for a cruise, which is stereotypically something that old people do, although I feel like I would love a cruise. I love a good boat. Boats. And so she says she's feeling her own mortality. So it's just all of these very complex emotions wrapped up into one. And this is part of why she goes to therapy with her mom and sticks it out even after Emily quits. And again, it's just one of those things that I didn't love about the revival, was that both Emily and Lorelai eventually gave up on talk therapy in favor of doing something drastic and just completely like trying to overhaul their lives. And it's almost like part of that bootstraps narrative of like, I don't need help from anyone or anything. I'm going to do this on my own. And so she goes and does wild, or I use that term loosely because she forgets her her permit in her bag and doesn't know where it is, can't dig it out, and never makes it to the trail. And so instead she takes a little walk to the top of a hill, checks out the vista, and somehow that's the moment she has this big emotional revelation about like, oh yeah, Dad did something that was a nice moment for us. It was, the best birthday I ever had. And it feels really dismissive of the help that grief therapy can provide to people going through this kind of thing. And the fact that they played it off as a joke doesn't really sit well with me. But on the whole, it's also, it's a potential strategy. I mean, it worked for Cheryl Strayed, I guess. potential strategy to deal with guilt to do something extreme like that. And Lorelai gave it a shot, and then she came back and was like, I think we should get married. So clearly some kind of emotional pipe was cleared, because now she felt free to commit and marry Luke and move on with her life. And I don't know why she couldn't do that before Richard passed, but that's a plot hole we don't have to talk about. But speaking of plot holes, well, I don't know if it could be a plot hole, but maybe it could be a plot hole. Rory shows almost no grief in the typical way that we would think. So my question is, do you think that her entire sort of like downward spiral in the revival has to do with her grief? Because that's kind of the only explanation I can come up with. She was extremely close to Richard, and like we see her sad at the funeral, but like we don't see her crying at the wake. We don't see her talking to Logan about it. We don't see her going to therapy or anything. And I find it strange for someone whose relationship was so close that maybe it's because she didn't have a tenuous relationship with him, and didn't have to deal with as much baggage as Lorelai did, and didn't have to deal with the direct loss of her partner the way Emily did. And so maybe her reaction was proportionate. I don't know. How did you feel about Rory's reaction and her entire like pattern of behavior in the revival when her mom and her grandma were so directly dealing with their grief, and she was just sort of like, I'm gonna fly off to London and have an affair with an engaged guy and live in the past and avoid all of my problems and just pretend that everything is hunky-dory?
It doesn't surprise me, because I think avoidance is one of Rory's MOs. I mean, let's flash back to season 1 when Dean tells her that he loves her. And even if she wasn't ready to say it in that moment, she didn't have to be. That was perfectly all right. I will make that very clear. It's perfectly all right if she wasn't ready to communicate those same reciprocal feelings of love to Dean in that moment. But instead of saying, hey, I'm not there yet, I need some more time to get to that same stage of feeling love for you that you need for me, she just goes to an avoidance mechanism and saying, I love the car. And innately, what I think was being unsaid in that moment was just like, I cannot respond to anything you just said because I can't process this. I don't have the words to communicate it. So I'm just going to try and avoid it and shut it down as best as I can. And I will confront this when, in my own time, when I'm able to process it, when I can absorb what has just been said to me, what I am currently dealing with, and then I can come up with a response again, verbally and emotionally in my own time. Let me emphasize, there is nothing wrong with that. If Lorelai, which is technically correct, but if Rory needed time to just be like, I don't love Dean yet in the way that he loves me. I need time to get there. I need time to be able to formulate a response to him and let him know, hey, I appreciate how much you care about me. It's not that I don't care about you, but I need time to get to the same feelings of love that you have for me and communicate that when I feel I'm ready to do so. Great. But she avoided it because she couldn't contend with it. And I feel like there's an overlap there with the grief that she feels when, you know, her great grandmother dies, when her grandfather eventually dies, where Rory is not the person that is able to just immediately process what she's feeling, take in the loss that she's dealing with, and verbalize how she's feeling, emote on it instantaneously. And she expresses it. She's like, should I be crying? Why am I not crying? You know, maybe a month down the line, there's a random moment where Rory is just breaking down over missing Richard, because that's the time frame that she needs to get there, and she'll emote in that moment when she feels like she needs to do so. But what's the problem? Like, if she needs the time to get there and to do that and the time to process, I don't think there's anything wrong in Rory's reactions, and it certainly does not make her an unempathetic person or an unsympathetic or unloving person towards her family members. I just think that perhaps she can't process as quickly as Emily and Lorelai can, and she needs more time to just let a loss or news like this sink in. She needs to grieve in her own time, even if that grief is coming out months or years down the line. Like, so what? It's just everyone's going to do it in their own way. Rory was doing it in her own way. And so I actually appreciate the fact that, that's what we get from her.
Again, it's not a linear process, but it's alluded to that he passed 4 months before the series starts. And so, yeah, there could have been some moments of breakdown after the funeral and the wake, and it was sort of like the event of it was done, and she was finally able to step back from the logistics and the planning and all of that to process emotionally. But the fact that we see Emily and Lorelai still going through their processes, like their whole arcs in this entire reboot were kind of centered around how they were processing through their grief and their emotions and how they were moving on with their lives after this massive change. Whereas with Rory, it feels like a completely different story. She's floating, she's not doing well with work. She's not doing well in her relationships or her friendships, seemingly. And it feels like a very different approach. And I completely agree that, yes, she is very avoidant. But the fact that she avoids dealing with any of this or acknowledging that this could be the root of some of her issues in the entire revival, I don't know whether it's on brand or not. Like, it is, but it's not. Like, it's just never addressed, and we're left to infer that all of this sort of life stuff that's happening to her is a result of just, depression, apathy, anxiety, whatever you want to call it, or whatever you see it coming out in her. Because, we get the stress tap dancing and the inability to cope with these emotions. And so maybe it will take years. I don't know. Maybe this is still too soon, 16 months after his passing. But I don't know. It feels different that Lorelai and Emily are facing the problem head on and Rory is not.
Yeah. I mean, I see all sides of it. But again, I just think that for all three of our Gilmore women, they were just always grieving and processing this trauma and this loss in a time frame that worked for them. And that was encouraging to me, not for the fact of, like, having to deal with a loss that's brutal no matter which way you slice it, but I loved the truthfulness and the reality of it, of seeing just portrayed on screen to us that every one of our Gilmore women is handling this differently, but they're seemingly doing it in a way that is going to be most beneficial for them in terms of their own individual healing process. And if there's one takeaway I would, want from this, it's like that's it. Grief and loss is a part of life. Sadly, it's something that we're all going to have to contend with if we haven't already, but you have to work through it in a way that is healthy and right for you.
Yeah. Okay, we still have quite a few people to touch on, and we've been talking for quite some time, so I feel like we're going to have to speed round some of this a little bit. Sort of moving on from contentious relationships with your father, let's just talk very briefly about Christopher and Straub. Or Strobe. I feel like I bounce back and forth between how I pronounce that guy's name.
Strobe.
No rhyme or reason to it. I just also just sort of season 5. It's quite heavy on like heavy topics. We have Luke's dark day in episode 10, which we'll come back to in a minute. Christopher's father dies in episode 11. Old Man Twickham goes in episode 18. Like, wow, season 5 was a bad year for Stars Hollow and for our Gilmore people. But yeah, I find it fascinating how Christopher getting the diagnosis for his dad and it being such a short time frame that they have to work with and to fix maybe some of their issues with each other gives him some clarity on his relationship with his own daughter. And he's like, there's a wall between us and I know it's there and I put it there, but I don't want it to be there. Like, he uses it as a way to try to connect with her, and she initially turns him down, but when she finds out that stroke has actually passed, Rory does, go to him and say, I wasn't really listening. I'm sorry. I understand what you were trying to do now, and like I don't want that wall between us either. It's kind of nice that they can come together over this. It's an unfortunate circumstance that this happens in real life all the time, that it is sort of the death of someone that you know or love that will prompt reflection and change. We shouldn't wait for those things to reflect, obviously. But, Emily says that Christopher's relationship with Strobe was tortured, and none of that matters in the end, is what she says. I don't know if she's entirely right about that. I think that to say that 30 some odd years of emotional neglect and abuse doesn't matter at the end does a huge disservice to, parental abuse everywhere. But I think that's kind of the ethos of the show, is the whole, when things end, people get very, like, they change. They get very different. And, obviously it's kind of a trope in media for a reason. It's inspired by real life, but sometimes these like sudden losses cause you to take action in your own life, in your own way, on the relationships that you want to work on.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's really, at the end of the day, what this was. I think for as much as there may have been a lack of love between Strobe and Chris, I think, the directness and the realization of his father dying was just a slap in the face for him, to realize, like, I've got a kid in the world. One of these days I'm going to die too. And I don't want my daughter to feel like I left this world feeling like I never cared about her, that I never invested in her life in the way that I could have, that I never showed her the care and compassion and the fatherly love that I was potentially able to put forth, that my father neglected to ever give me. I want to do better for my child, and perhaps even Gigi being in, the equation at this point, kind of just perpetuated that. But I feel like he was just able to have that, like, moment where he's like, I need to do better than my father did for the sake of my child, because I know how I feel now with my father passing, feeling like I'm stuck wondering, like, did he ever truly love me? Did my father ever have any genuine care? I don't want my child to, move forward in the world when I pass having to ask those same questions. So let me do what I can now to rectify that, so that Rory doesn't have to feel those same things, because she shouldn't have to, because I don't want her to have to feel what I'm going through right now. And you know what? Kudos, Chris. That's a really awesome display of love and care in that moment, to recognize that.
Yeah, and self-reflection, which is not something he does all that often. So it is one of those rare moments of wisdom and maturity on Chris's part, even if, like, some people say that in that episode he's really annoying with the whole, like, oh, you right, college, you have class, duh. Like, I think that's just him making a joke. He's trying to, lighten the mood, and it's his way of coping. Plenty of us use humor to get around uncomfortable situations. So I don't really blame him for that. I think he was not in a great headspace, and he was looking for support. And in Lorelai's words, his support, like his main support in life, was 2 and heavily into Teletubbies. So, the fact that Lorelai and Rory are there in his life as positive influences and supports is really good for him, because he doesn't seem to have a ton of close friends or other family members he can lean on in this moment. And his connection with them is undeniable. You know, I think it's great that they both go over there and have their own moments with him to show their support for his loss. So, yeah. All right.
Yeah.
I think, and the other thing is like Sherry has just left him. So not only is he going through the loss of a father, but he's gone through the loss of his marriage and his partner too. So he's had a particularly tough year, and we'll get to Wedding Bell Blues eventually and his behavior in that. And when you kind of put those things in context, it's just like, ooh, he's really been going through it, and he's probably having a bad reaction to all of this upheaval, and it can't be easy. It's not really, it doesn't make it okay, but it starts to put him in context a little more when you realize how close together all of this stuff happens. So I think that kind of wraps up Straub. And then again, with losing fathers, Luke Danes. His dark day happens right before Chris loses his dad. So November 30th, 1989 was the day that Luke lost his dad. And every year on that date, he mourns and he shuts himself away. He doesn't talk to people. Apparently, he becomes a huge prick, as we see in his interactions with Mrs. Thompson and with Lorelai. He loses all ability to emotionally regulate on that day every year. And my question is, how the hell does Lorelai not know that he does this? She's been going to the diner for 8 years. How does she never notice if they go there for breakfast every freaking day or coffee every freaking day that like there's always one day where somehow Luke's just not there? Like,
plot hole.
A little bit. Yeah. I think it really was just the writers wanting.
I want to give you a more detailed answer than that, but that's what I'm going to throw at you. Plot hole.
Yeah, the writers just wanted a bit of mystery around it. But also, if it's not that, it does go to show kind of how self-involved Lorelai is, which we already knew. So, all right, what else do you think about the dark day? You said you had a longer answer. Continue.
Oh no, I was, I could throw another, it's just because my follow-up was just gonna be because Lorelai is self-centered. And so, she probably thinks like Luke went fishing, which maybe he did, because we don't know exactly what he does on his dark day. It's his day to, spend as he pleases. But I feel like in Lorelai's mind, she could have just been like, Luke's taking a day off work. Maybe the trout's, running today. Maybe the salmon's running, whatever it is. Like,
the salmon runs in like September. It's too late for that.
You know what?
I know these things. Have you ever watched the salmon run? It's fucking hilarious. Pardon my French, but like seriously, if you ever have a creek where you can find the salmon, just go sit and watch. It's so funny. Find like a spot where they have to go up, like up a big, like waterfall or dam or like big dip in the river and go up because it's funny.
I have not. Maybe one of these days I'll get to catch that out. But again, case in point, I just feel like Lorelai was probably just like, oh, like he's probably fishing or camping or whatever, and I'll just see him the next day. I don't feel like she ever maybe gave it significant thought because again, Lorelai, unfortunately, is sometimes way too self-centered for her own good. So I feel like it's probably that and a combination of plot holes because I feel like for all the time that she's lived in Stars Hollow, it's like Luke's dark day was probably the gossip of Stars Hollow when it rolled around every single year. So a little bit of both, probably.
Yeah. I find one of the interesting things about that episode is the boat. Because, obviously we see him fighting with Mrs. Thompson. He's a complete jerk to her. And then Lorelai sort of rescues it from getting scrapped. And Luke is angry about this initially because he says to her, "This is who I am. I don't want to hang on to things or stare at things." And I'm like, excuse me, you kept your father's diner exactly the way it was, except you turned it into a diner. Like, you live in his old office. You're an extremely nostalgic person. You absolutely hang on to things. And Lorelai calls you out on this immediately and then backtracks. But it's like, no, you're just like your dad. And so I think it was just his pain in that moment being like, oh, it's too much of a reminder. But when he gets to step back, he's like, no, I do hold on to things, or I do want to hold on to things. And I don't know. It's just, again, with the sort of like plot holes. I don't know. Again, with the writers, did you watch anything? But I love the moment that he has with Emily in forgiveness and stuff, where he tells her that piece of information. Emily hasn't been able to let go of Richard's brothers tie since they came to the hospital. Basically, it's like a talisman for her to hold on to, something to ground her a little bit. And she's sitting with Luke outside in the hallway, and it's just the two of them. And he's like, I kept my dad's hardware store basically exactly the same. Like, everything on the walls is the same. He would have called me a fool. But Emily's like, I'm sure he would have liked having his life work honored in that way. And Luke rebukes that a little bit, but it goes to his sentimentality. And I love that moment with Emily. And I really would have hoped that moment would be humanizing for their relationship. But ultimately, Emily just still muffs it up again later with trying to interfere in season 5. So, yep, it doesn't last long, but it's a beautiful moment.
Yeah. I just, oops doopsie. I appreciated that reference, even if no one else gets it. Yeah, I don't have anything else that I need to necessarily feel like I need to say or comment on about Luke's Dark Day. Do you, or do you want to move on to another moment of loss within the show?
Let's move on, but also with Luke, Louis's funeral. Obviously Luke is seemingly one of the only family members that cares, and he does this for his dad, basically, because that's what his dad wanted. And he goes through planning this entire funeral. Turns out his family doesn't come. Initially, the reenactors don't want to come. No townspeople come except for Lorelai. It's really just the two of them. And the entire time, the Reverend is saying, the nice, socially acceptable things you say at a funeral. And in between each one, Luke makes a dig, just quietly, to Lorelai. And, it's another one of those hard questions that I was kind of talking about earlier, where it's just like, what happens when, a family member dies and you weren't that close to them, or they weren't really a good person. And he says to Lorelai in a moment of frustration when he finds out that his family's not coming, he's like, a family member dies, you pay your respects, period. Like, that's just how it's done. And clearly that's not true. That's like in practice in the world. We see that plenty of people skip relatives' funerals, not only out of like, I didn't like you, but for any number of reasons. And so it's one of the first really heavy moments in the show, when we find out that Luke has lost a relative. And the fact that Lorelai really steps up as a friend and helps him through it is a big moment or a big step forward for them, I guess, in their friendship and their relationship. So I think it's at least worth acknowledging that moment. And again, a self-reflective moment for Luke, where he's like, that's not me, is it? Like, I'm getting crankier by the year. And Lorelai is there to point out for him, like, who else would bake a girl coffee cake and blow up balloons for her birthday? And who else would take in their sister's kid without even like asking any questions? Would Louis have done that? Absolutely not. Like, you are not him. Might be a bit of a curmudgeon, but you're not that far gone. And I think it was, again, a good moment for Luke in his self-reflection. Another character who doesn't maybe do it often enough.
Yeah. Again, I concur. I don't really have anything else I feel like I can contribute, other than I just think that was very well put. And I think that really wraps up the grief process that we saw him have.
Yeah. Next up, I need to
Oh,
practice
boy.
my witch cackle. Witch cackle.
Oh, here we go. Mm-hmm.
All right. Asher Fleming. Go.
Sorry. I will actually need to take a sip of coffee for this because that's hilarious. Did we ever get the coroner's report? Was it death by vagina?
I'm sure that's what the official report said.
Was the man taken down by Paris Geller's
lady parts?
hoo-ha? Yeah.
I was gonna say hoo-ha, and then I was like, no, lady parts.
You know what? We're clearly on the same wavelength.
Yeah, Marty lost the pool.
Rory. No, Rory, she wasn't taken down by that. But you know what? Like, as crude as that may be, you know what? That's what the show wrote. So we're just, dishing out what was given to us. We're not trying to be inordinately vulgar.
Yeah. If you haven't watched the show, this is absolutely like in context.
Yes. But I mean, first off, like, I have issues with that relationship to begin with, but that's not the point of this conversation here. In terms of Asher Fleming's death, I struggle to even know why he was written in as a romantic partner for Paris. But I say that because I feel like in the need to write him out and get him out of the show as a romantic partner for Paris, so that she can move on to other men in her life and either other career paths or just, progress on her character arc. I feel like his death was just, a very lazy way to go about it, where this was not a man that was like, 90, 100 knocking on death's door. Granted, he wasn't a spring chicken, but he wasn't old, so to say. Like, he was only in his 60s. He still probably had like a couple decades left, short of actual, health issues or whatever. But I feel like his death was just, we need to write him out, so we'll just heart attack and move on with it. And it does a disservice to that character, and it does a disservice to their relationship because, now Paris is having to contend with, here's a partner that I had in life, even if it was never going to go anywhere, that might have been good for me, or at least was good for me in the moment. They mock his death, with the whole jokes about like, was he killed by your vagina? Did he die during sex because XYZ? And it's like, can we just not? Like, can we not? Like, there was no need for that. I hate it. I hate that we're mocking anyone's death in general, but mocking his death in this way. It never sat right with me. It continues to not sit right with me. Every time it comes up in one of my rewatches, I'm just like, nope. We're making fun of someone dying. I'm never going to be okay with that.
Yeah, it's one thing to introduce levity into an episode with death like they did in Raining Lorelei. It's another to make just a punchline out of it. And the seeds are planted near the end of season 4 when he ends up in the hospital, and Paris is like, he's old. He orders old gelato, and like he looked like he was staring up at God, like he was looking into the light, and she has this moment of doubt about their relationship, but goes to Oxford with him anyway, and that's where he ultimately has a heart attack and dies suddenly. And again, you're right, like if he's Richard's age, he's about 61 maybe at this point, somewhere in that range. My dad had a heart attack at 63, had a triple bypass, and survived because he was healthy. You know what I mean? Maybe Asher eats nothing but red meat and that's what did him in, but like it's very possible to recover from something at that age. For my dad, it was more like congenital. his cardiothoracic surgeon said he had the narrowest arteries he'd ever seen. And so I feel like that bodes really well for me. But, so for Asher to be kind of so young, it's not that it's impossible, but, it speaks to the show's pattern of kind of unexpected deaths. Strobe technically was unexpected because his diagnosis came late, whatever it is. I'm assuming it was some form of aggressive stage 4 cancer that, nobody detected because he wasn't getting enough medical care in your stupid system down there. That's neither here nor there, but everything else is just sort of like died in a heart attack in their sleep, or died in a heart attack suddenly, had a heart attack suddenly, almost died. Like, just very dramatic for the sake of television. And so they lay that groundwork that he's old and he has troubles with stuff. And then, they unceremoniously kill him off. And it's a joke from the get-go. And the whole process is made into a big, big joke. That episode where she comes back and she wants to have the wake, and it's a part, like, people just think it's a weird party and, they bring kegs and they have to kind of keep it away from Paris. And she's just so verklempt and smoking his cigar or his pipe to smell like him. And, it's just, the whole thing is kind of ridiculous. It was a convenient way to end a train wreck of a relationship because they were like, ooh, now we've written ourselves into a bit of a corner with this one. And, we can't get Michael York back to break up with her. They couldn't have just broken up in Oxford. They had to kill him off and have Paris go through this weird mourning process. And my other question is, how the hell is she, like, the de facto executor of his estate, it seems? She's here mediating disputes between the grandchildren. Like, you've been dating him for a couple of months and you're less than half his age. Did he really change his will to make you the executor because his family was that much of a bunch of vultures? Like, what? It stretches the bounds of credibility. And like you said, it's a lazy way to end a bad plot line that was never good. Never a good look for anyone, including the writers. Sorry, not sorry.
Nope, you said it. All I can do is concur. I don't have anything else to add other than I concur.
Yeah. All right. And so the last of my notes, we have a few townies, notably, that go. Old Man Twickham, again, with death being a joke. It's like, oh, this is the 20th time we've said bye to Old Man Twickham, or like 17th time we've said goodbye. He's been on his deathbed as long as Rory's been alive. Kirk is selling souvenirs. And we've never even met Old Man Twickham that we know of. He's just sort of a convenient creation for this episode so that we can get the setup of Luke wanting this big stately house in Stars Hollow. And so, in a way, again, it feels a little distasteful to just, like, kill off a previously unnamed character for the sake of some other kind of development, but par for the course.
Yeah. Nope. Just, property needs to be acquired. Get rid of said property owner. We're done.
Turn his house into a temporary museum. Crappy one at that. I think I like that episode more than most people, but again, starting it off with, like, the death of a townie. It's not the only time they do that. The other notable one is obviously Stan, when he, bequeaths some money to the town to replace the bells after his passing. And the girls are all, like, Rory, Lorelai, and Suki are at his funeral talking about how death comes in fives in Stars Hollow, and they're like, who's next? Hank Krutzman? And then he falls, and they're like, we are the witches of Eastwick. Like, it's kind of funny, but kind of not at the same time, but I don't know. Yep. It's typical Lorelai, if nothing else, if not funny.
Yeah, it's not the first and last time that they have mocked someone in Stars Hollow's death. And no bueno.
Yeah.
Let's just
and the last notable townie I think we have to talk about is Fran.
Again,
Rip.
let's just make fun of her death because it benefits us and suits us. Like, Fran was a sweetheart. I mean, first off, anyone who gives me free desserts, it's like, you better believe I'm going to mourn you, not just because of the free desserts, but just, like,
Yeah.
she just seemed like she was, the Stars Hollow, like, grandma, so to say, like, just always cared about how everyone was doing. If they came in, she was always going to be like, have some cake, have some chocolate, whatever I can give to you. Just seemed like, the exact sort of person that I would want to know, just a total gem of a human being. And then you make fun of her death as she's being led to be buried. And you're just already talking about, like, well, she's in the grave now, so how can this benefit us? Let's not. And damn
say
it,
we
Lorelai
didn't.
and Suki, you are better than this. And, like, oh gosh, none of it was okay.
Yeah, Lorelai kind of recognizes that. Like, I was negotiating at a funeral, and it may have been the most inappropriate thing to happen today until Kirk sneezed and dropped the casket. Like, ugh, they fridge an adorable old lady so that Lorelai can have her dream. I've said it before, and I will say it again. I wish they had Fran step in after the fire at the Dragonfly to say, you know what? I know I said I wanted to hang on to this property, but this town needs an inn and it needs you guys running it. And I want you to have the Dragonfly. I will arrange for you to purchase the Dragonfly because the town needs this. You need this. I need this. That would have been like such a touching moment. And instead, they gave us a really inappropriate funeral scene. Look lost in grief. Like, oh, it was so bad. So bad. And uncomfortable. But the one thing that was excellent that came out of that episode was Lorelai's conversation with Miss Patty. It's like, oh, it's starting. Everyone's going to go. I'm so glad I had all that sex.
Yeah.
Like, it really puts things into perspective for you. I'm so glad that I, had all that sex, sowed my wild oats. So that is the one, like, that part was actually funny. The rest of it was distasteful.
Yeah. And again, I will say, just echoing another shout out, as distasteful as it was, I'm not arguing it, getting Ben Falcone in that episode. Also,
you kind of had him do something else. Like,
I mean, yeah, he could have done anything else, but I will say, like, and again, it wasn't their fault. They're just, delivering the lines that are written, what they need to do as actors. But, just at the time I was watching it as a teenager, obviously I didn't know the extent of their relationship, but just going back on it now, every time I watch it, Ben Falcone, like, enough said.
Yeah, he didn't really get to shine with his full comedic range in this particular role, but it is funny to look back and be like, oh, I see what you did there. Mm-hmm. But all right, and last but not least, for the grief and loss portion of this, is the grief of the loss of a pet. I talked about Cinnamon's wake at the top of the episode. It's the first significant death we have because that cat was awesome and beloved in the town. And yeah. Do you think it was like too much to have a wake for a cat? Or is it just kind of, nice to gather people together to support anyone who's lost anyone or anything? I lean towards the latter. I didn't have a wake when my cat died, but like, I didn't have a whole town who loved him. So what do you think?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like it was presented to us in a very ostentatious way where it's like, am I attending a cat funeral or am I attending, a sweet 16 or a graduation party? Where am I at here? And so I feel like the juxtaposition of how it was given to us in terms of like this event is being made out to us, I think, to be very over the top for what we're actually sort of here to remember and be in solace about. But I will say, like, echoing what you said, the loss of any pet is hard. The loss of, pets are family, and it's it's not any less difficult sometimes than losing a family member. So the grief and the loss process is still going to be the same, if it's not even more so, again, on a case-by-case basis. So for how it was presented to us, I still think that it was just very nice and humbling to see, the townspeople coming together for Babette and Maury and just being like, we're here for you. Anything that we can do, if we can assist you in any way, whether we're remembering, a beloved cat at this moment in time. But regardless of whether it was the loss of a person, a cat, a dog, I just think it was also very much about how this town is coming together for one another to help out one of their own in a moment and in a time of need. And I think it's centered around the loss of, a pet, but it was just really nice to see, regardless, how this town responds when someone amongst them whom they all love is hurting and in pain.
Yeah. I love how Michelle shows up to bring something to Lorelai, and he's like, "You're having a party without me?" And she's like, "This isn't a party. This is a wake for a cat." And he's like, "For a cat? They like their private parts, these cats." And then in season 7, he has his own animal funeral. We have Pawpaw dying in the same episode where Lorelai and Chris finally call it quits. And, Lorelai's got her own stuff on the go. She's dealing with her own difficult emotions, and divorce is a type of loss and grief unto itself. And we'll have a whole episode where we talk about that and sort of the crossover, the loss, because divorce is, I think, second only to death in terms of like most traumatic life events. So that's its own whole discussion. We don't have time for it now. But, asking Lorelai and Suki to help him put on a memorial for Pawpaw kind of puts a lot on their plate. And he's like, "Yeah, I'm sorry my grief is inconvenient to you. Like, next time I'll try to schedule a tragedy with better timing," basically, and when it's more convenient for you. And it goes to show that there is no good time to suffer a loss, and that you do just kind of have to lean on your people and do what you can to get through it, whether it's throwing a celebration of life like Michelle did for Pawpaw, or grieving by yourself, processing it in therapy. It all kind of, it's all hard, and there's no good time or good way to do it. You just have to find a way through.
Yeah. I mean, again, like, I know I've lost family members in my life. I know you have as well. We've both lost pets, but it's not exclusive to us. Like, again, like, death and this grief and this loss is a part of life. Everyone is going to always handle and process it differently. But I'm glad that this show touched upon it and didn't shy away from it, which they very well could have. Even if they made light of it at times in a way that was just inappropriate and maybe just you're glossing over this and it's not okay. They did have moments of real truth and realization within this show of just how the loss of someone that is so beloved can affect someone else. And I'm glad that we got it, and that, it was shown to us, and that we can talk about it now, because it is a very real and truthful part of life.
Yeah, it's not a huge part of the show, but it's real, and so they had to talk about it. But, that wraps us up on our main topic. But I had one little, like fun game as a way to sort of lighten the mood of a sweet taste in our mouth as we go about the rest of our Friday evening. So I put together a little Would You Rather fall/Halloween edition inspired by Gilmore Girls.
Of course you did.
Of course I did. So just a quickie little fun thing to end off on. Mm-hmm. Number 1, would you rather attend the teen hayride or volunteer at the Harvest Festival?
Volunteer at the Harvest Festival.
Interesting. See, I think those pilgrim outfits would be pretty itchy. And, there's the whole bundle of the sticks up the butt scenario of the teen ride, but at least you get to like sort of sit and see the town. And it's probably lots of twinkle lights everywhere. You could romanticize that.
Maybe I'll still volunteer and take my luck.
Fair enough. Scary or sweet?
Scary.
Oh, yeah. How did I know you were going to say that? I'm more of a sweet gal. Yeah, as I alluded to, I'm more of a hocus pocus kind of gal than I Know What You Did Last Summer or
yeah, and I'm over
Nightmare
here
on Elm
just
Street.
being like, please do your best to scare the ever-loving crap out of me. Thank you and good night.
Don't understand you, but okay. Lorelei's red Sherpa-lined coat or Rory's Sherpa-lined jean jacket?
Ooh, the red Sherpa-lined coat.
I agree. I love that.
That's not even a contest.
Yeah, that's an excellent coat.
Yeah.
Ooh, this one's a little tougher, at least for me. I think I know what your answer is going to be, but tailgating or a hockey game? Told you.
How dare you?
How very dare I?
How dare you?
Yeah.
Can I just have both? Like, don't make me pick here.
Yeah. You know what? I make the rules. Yes, you can.
Thank you, because that was going to be way too difficult.
Yeah, that's a hard one for me too, because like I've loved both sports about the same amount of time, although I've only had my first tailgating experience recently. So like I'm more attached to hockey, but like tailgating involves like getting up kind of early and going and getting drunk before a football game. Like what's not to love?
Yeah, I can't pick.
It's a tough one.
Never going to be a way. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Trick or treating or scary movies?
I'm going to say scary movies because I feel like I can always acquire candy at my leisure, so to say. And yeah, sometimes like, it's just nice to be lazy at the end of a workday and just make a bowl of popcorn and watch a nice scary movie to wind down, which I know you can't relate to, but
no, can't do it. I would say trick or treating because, yeah, now that I'm an adult, I can acquire candy at will, but it's so much better when you get it for free and you get to like dress up and go around and be like, candy please.
Candy. That's also fair. Free candy. Yeah.
Yeah. Apple pie or pumpkin pie?
Ooh, pumpkin pie.
Ooh, yeah. I am of two minds about this because apple is my favorite kind of pie overall, and I feel like it's appropriate anytime. But pumpkin to me is like so specific to Thanksgiving and Halloween. Like I don't eat it any other time of year besides October because that's when we have Thanksgiving here. And like I think I like apple better, but pumpkin just holds so many nostalgic memories for me. So another one of those like, can I have both on a plate at one time covered in ice cream? Okay, thanks. Yeah.
Now you're talking with the a la mode.
Yeah. All right, this is also maybe going to be a tough one. Halloween or Thanksgiving?
I'm going to still say Thanksgiving.
I think I agree. It feels cozier. Halloween is fun, but I think I enjoyed it a lot more as a kid and maybe even slightly into college, but not as much by then. Maybe if I have kids someday, I'll feel differently. But I've always liked the whole like getting together and having mashed potatoes and watching all the Thanksgiving episode of Friends and Gilmore and How I Met Your Mother. Those are my go-to fall shows.
And I will say for like me as like, an American who experiences Thanksgiving at a, only a month later too, but like Thanksgiving is always chock full of football games, starting at like, you have like a 1 p.m. game, you have a 4 p.m. game, and then you have an 8 p.m. game. So while you're stuffing your face with just, mashed potatoes and turkey, if you eat it, cranberry sauce, stuffing all of your regular go-tos, and just, having all of this delicious, delicious food, you also get to enjoy some quality foosball. So, and you don't have to go anywhere.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Thanksgiving all day, every day. I love Halloween, but it's all about Thanksgiving.
Yeah, Thanksgiving culture here is a little bit different. We're not quite as intense about it as you guys are, but it still is one of my favorite holidays because here, it being in early October, like that's really the kickoff of the fall season, which is my favorite. So like the leaves are turning, the air is crisp. You've got football back, you've got hockey back. It's just a great time. Whereas Halloween is sort of like, it's a little more niche. You have to have the right vibe of what you want to do for like to truly get the best out of Halloween.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. S'mores or apple tarts? Like Emily's
Ooh.
apple tarts.
S'mores.
Oh, interesting. I might have to say s'mores too, but the way I do s'mores is I take those like celebration cookies that have caramel in them and put a marshmallow between two of them and like make a s'more that way. And you can just like make them in the oven even if you don't have a bonfire. So it's like such a great hack.
I was absolutely going to say like s'mores, but with a deviation. Your deviation seems to be that. My deviation on s'mores is just either add peanut butter or Nutella into the mix. And now we're talking.
I'm a caramel girl, so give me caramel. But yeah, agreed. Speaking of peanut butter, Reese's peanut butter cups or Reese's Pieces?
Peanut butter cups.
Yeah. Both are excellent, but I actually might say Reese's Pieces because I find that peanut butter cups have kept shrinking over the years, whereas Reese's Pieces have always been good. And I like the sort of like crunch they offer.
Yeah, but there's something like, I don't know what they put in it. Maybe it's crack. It probably is crack for all I know. But the peanut butter that is within a Reese's peanut butter cup, it's like, it sends me.
I know that feeling. Also, because like maybe I eat Reese's Pieces less frequently, and therefore they're more of a novelty. And I'm like, how do I sleep on Reese's Pieces all the time? I don't know what it is. I tend to gravitate towards peanut butter cups, but every time I have Reese's Pieces, I'm like, these are the shit. So I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But all right, coats or oversized sweaters?
Oversized sweaters.
How did I know you were going to say that? Because, like, even when you've visited me in Canada, I don't think you've ever brought a coat. You just always have your, like, fleece sweaters.
Yeah. You need to, like, go talk to my Italian grandmother because I feel like one of her constant gripes was always just like, where's your jacket? You always leave the house without a jacket. You're going to get pneumonia and die. What is wrong with you? So take out a page of her book. But yeah.
Yeah. You came to visit me for my birthday in January and didn't bring a jacket. Yeah. I would say oversized. Actually, no, I would say coats. I have a lot of like really great coats. I'm a coat person. And I get cold very easily, bad circulation, and like to stay toasty. So.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Hay bale maze or haunted house? I know the hay bale maze happens in spring in the show, but it is absolutely a fall activity, so don't come for me.
Haunted house. Again, please just scare the crap out of me. Or do your best. I don't know if you're going to succeed. But.
Yeah. I've had the living daylight scared out of me in both. I would say haunted house because you don't have to like you know what you're getting into for the most part in going in there. And so you can sort of like prepare yourself mentally for it. And with a hay bale maze, it can potentially get frustrating if you go the wrong way. So I'm like,
oh yeah,
haunted house is just like you go through.
Yeah, if I entered into a hay bale maze that I'm supposed to potentially be in and out of in 10 minutes and a half hour goes by and I'm like, I can't figure out which direction I need to go, it would just frustrate the like crap out of me and I'd be like, just get me out of here. Like I don't have patience for that.
Yeah. No patience for jam hands or getting lost in hay bale mazes. Yeah. Okay. Halloween party or visiting haunted places?
Halloween party.
Same.
Yeah, I've had a couple friends in life that have thrown some really banging ones. It's always been an excellent time. And I get to see and spend time with people that I really like hanging out with, as opposed to visiting a place on my own or just whatever. Like, there's just so much more to be said for like just chilling with people that I actually like spending time with, and yeah, just the party.
Same. And I've never been much one to like seek out spooky experiences, like trying to spot ghosts. So, Halloween party.
Yeah.
All right. This could potentially end our friendship. Not sure.
Oh boy.
Nightmare Before Christmas or Hocus Pocus?
You think it's going to end our friendship, but it's not. Because I'm going to still say Hocus Pocus.
Yes.
Both are excellent, but I feel like, admittedly, I never, again, Nightmare Before Christmas, classic. But I feel like I never got on the hype train or found it as beloved to me as it was to the rest of the entire known world. So yeah, I mean, it's never like, I'm sorry, it's never going to be my go-to holiday-esque film. It's not bad. I will almost say, like, maybe overrated. Sorry, not sorry. Like, the watch universe can crucify me for this, but it's Hocus Pocus if I had to choose.
I feel the same way because I didn't watch it until like, I don't know, 2 years ago or something. And so not having that childhood nostalgia for it the way I do for Hocus Pocus definitely keeps it from reaching the heights for me as it does for others. And I feel the same way about Beetlejuice too. Like, I was never into that as a kid.
Well, now the friendship's over.
Again, I'm not saying it's a bad movie, but I didn't watch it as a kid. And so, like, coming at it as a 31-year-old woman or whatever I was at the time, I was just like, I mean, this movie is fine and it's got some fun scenes, but like, I don't understand how this is like everybody raves about this movie. I'm like, it's fine. Okay.
Yeah. Go watch Halloween Town. Like, just
I will.
I just going back to like like the first thing we talked about, like, it blows my mind that you haven't come across it yet, but it's okay. But like, you just need to watch it because, again, like, it's such like the ultimate feel good Halloween movie where you're just like, oh yeah, okay, like warm fuzzies.
Fair enough. 2 more.
Okay.
Witches or ghosts?
Witches.
Same. Again, on the Hocus Pocus train, I've always like had more of a thing for witches. That's for sure, as opposed to like the paranormal activity kind of movies. Witches. Last but not least, Babette's gallows or Lorelei's electric chair and pulling guts out of Luke.
Tough. Of course, he had to end it on a toughie. I'm gonna say Lorelei's electric chair and pulling guts out of Luke. Because I feel like she had to persuade Luke to actually do it when he was not on board, where Maury is originally like, yeah, like, string me up, it's fine. And I'm sure both are horrific displays of death and torture. But I feel like Lorelei's allowed for more creativity, and I have to give her bonus points for actually having to convince Luke to do it when he was originally just like, absolutely not.
Again, I make the rules, and so I'm like, neither. I don't love that they're both like glorifications of capital punishment. It's never much fun for that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't like that either, but you were the one that posed this question.
Yeah, and I'm the one who makes the rules, so come at me, bro. I don't know. They both seem like fun. I was just never one for like super spooky Halloween decorations. I think it's like maybe going a little too far. It reminds me of that episode of Modern Family where Claire and Phil get new neighbors, and Claire is all about Halloween. Let's Phil take over the decorating one year, and he does like I think he calls it Funland, and it's all like fun, bright, happy decorations. But Claire likes to use Halloween to show that she has edge, and so when the new neighbor next door sort of teases her, being like, you know, you're not scary, I'm not scared by you, we're gonna have the scariest decorations in town. Claire's like, oh, I'll show you, and she like totally axes all of Phil's decorations and does like a insane asylum from hell theme, and it's hilarious. Go watch that episode of Modern Family if you haven't seen it and you're in a spooky mood, because it's hilarious. But yeah, it reminds me of that. And I was never much one for that kind of stuff. Like I said, I'm a little bitch when it comes to being scared. I prefer the sort of like wholesome side of Halloween, where it's like kids in cute costumes and handing out candy and watching kind of corny movies from the 90s that are like scary if you're 8 but never again. So just my vibe. I don't
know. Halloween Town.
Yeah. I'm really surprised that Gilmore didn't really directly handle Halloween more, because it's such a fall-based show, and Rory's birthday falls in October. To me, Lorelai just seems like absolutely the kind of person who is all over Halloween. You know, she loves a good theme party, and she loves decorating and running with a theme. So the fact that we never saw her having a Halloween party, or anybody else in Stars Hollow having a Halloween party, it's obviously just briefly mentioned in 21 is the loneliest number, and fall is the closest thing we get, obviously, to any sort of Halloween sequence on the show. And I think it was a real missed opportunity.
Yeah, I agree. It just makes me think, like, can you imagine, like, when Rory was a kid, like, year after year, from the time she was probably 1, like, all of the epic outfits that she probably put her in, how cute and adorable they probably would have been, you know, parading Rory around to, like, you know, the inn guests, and just being like, go knock on room 7, ask for candy. And, like, come on, adorbs. You know, she was pulling out all the stops.
Yeah. Well, I think perhaps that wraps us up for this one. A pretty long episode, but, you know, we had to address this topic at some point. So, yeah. Next week, you should come back and join us again, because it's Fight Club 2!
Fight Club! Wait. Shit.
Broke the first and second rules.
I just broke the rule.
I don't know what the punishment for that is, but come back next week, because we're going to be breaking down all the great fights from seasons 3 and 4. Yep. And we're going to be talking about Tick, 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 Boom and Afterboom, which to me is just like the perfect time to do that, because some of the best fights, man, some of the best moments and conflicts from the entire series happen here. So I'm like, yes. Oh, let's go.
Fight me.
Okay.
Soon. Cool. Right. Yep. Yeah. Come back and join us for that. In the meantime, go back and watch some of our old episodes if you want GG content. It's fall rewatch season, so just dive deep into the seasons if you're not watching our episodes. If you have seen any of our old episodes, or if you go back and watch, please always share them with your GG friends and family, anyone who loves the show as much as we do. And please just always remember to do all of those YouTube-y things for us. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel. It's one click, and it really, really does help us out, and we're always so appreciative of it.
Yep. And on that note, happy Halloween, and we'll see you next Friday for dinner.
Bye.
Bye.